In forgotten corners of the world, where the moss grows thicker than memory, there are stories they never dare write down. Stories bound in whispers, sown into soil, and spoken only by the wind. Welcome to Folk Fear, a place where ancient beliefs bleed into the present, where old gods are not dead, just patient. Here we follow the brittle path between tradition and terror, where a wedding veil becomes a shroud, where blessings come with blood, where rituals bind more than just bodies. Tonight we journey to a village wrapped in silence and into the roots of a tree that does not forget. This is the story of the bride tree, and once you hear it, you may never look at a veil the same way again. Now, listen closely. The forest remembers.
The road into the village was narrow and laced with vines, the kind that coiled around forgotten signposts and whispered of things better left unnamed. Claire's car rattled over gravel. Her GPS had long since lost signal. The sun dipped low behind a wall of ancient trees, casting elongated shadows that looked like reaching fingers. A thick hush settled across the land, not the peaceful quiet of countryside, but something heavier, as if the air itself was holding its breath. She wasn't alone in the car, not really. In the passenger seat sat her wedding dress, delicately folded in a plastic cover, ivory silk glaringly out of place in a world so green, so moss-draped, so still. Noah had told her the village was charming. He had said things like, "It's where my grandparents married, where my parents met." He spoke of heritage and old ways with a kind of reverence that made her feel like a trespasser before she'd even arrived. When the trees finally broke and the village revealed itself, Claire wasn't sure what unsettled her more, the age of it or how untouched it seemed, as though time had skipped over this place, refusing to set foot in a land that had bartered modernity for myth. Stone cottages with bowed rooftops leaned into each other like gossiping elders. Windows were small and veiled. Every door was adorned with a faded ribbon, white, frayed, and weather-beaten. When she parked outside Noah's grandmother's house, the wind shifted. A sudden gust lifted her veil, not the one in the car, but a veil she didn't know she was wearing. The kind of veil made of expectation, of roles, of stories too old to argue with. The front door creaked open before she could knock. "Claire," said a voice, aged and warm, but lined with something sharper beneath. "You made it before dark. That's good. The forest sleeps lighter when the sun's gone." The woman was thin and bent like a question mark, her gray braid nearly touching her waist. Her name was Agda, though Claire would learn that no one ever called her that. Everyone in the village simply called her grandmother, even those who weren't kin. Inside, the cottage was dimly lit, windows draped in lace. The walls were lined with sepia-toned photographs, solemn brides beside expressionless grooms, not a smile among them. "They say too many teeth in a wedding photo invites mourning," Agda offered, noticing Claire's stare. "Our ways are old, but they protect." Claire gave a polite smile. "I respect tradition, I do, but I'm not one for superstition." Agda's face didn't change, but the air in the room did. "Of course, dear. Everyone says that, until they meet the tree." The bride tree was not a tourist attraction. It wasn't marked on any map. It had no plaques nor legends inscribed in wood. It simply was, old as the soil, tall as a church spire, and chained in rusted iron and bridal veils that fluttered like trapped spirits. Claire saw it for the first time 2 days later. They had walked in silence, Noah had gone ahead to speak with the village elders. Claire wandered, camera in hand, down a dirt path that wound into the edge of the woods. She wasn't drawn there, not consciously, but the deeper she went, the quieter the world became, until even the bird song ceased. And then she saw it, the tree. It stood alone in a clearing, a gnarled mass of black bark and thorny branches, bound from root to crown in iron chains. Dozens of veils, some fresh, most faded and torn, were tangled among the links. Some hung like nooses, others like forgotten offerings. All of them moved, even without wind. As Claire stepped closer, something in her chest tightened, a pressure, a warning. A single voice broke the stillness. "You're not supposed to come alone." Claire turned. Behind her stood a woman no older than 20, barefoot, with her hair braided tight and eyes too old for her face. She wore a faded white dress, and in her hands she carried something wrapped in cloth. "For you," she said, "from the others." Claire hesitated before unwrapping it. Inside was a veil, handmade, delicate, the lacework so fine it looked like spiderweb. Tiny red threads were sewn into the edges like veins. "I already have one," she said, smiling awkwardly, "for the wedding." "This one is for the tree," the girl replied. "Every bride has one." Claire frowned. "Why would I give a veil to a tree?" The girl looked past her toward the black trunk bound in iron. Her eyes didn't blink. "So it doesn't take yours." Then she turned and walked away, silent as snowfall. That night, Claire lay awake in the attic bedroom of Agda's house, the gifted veil draped over the chair by the window. She hadn't told Noah. She wasn't sure why. The moonlight painted strange shapes on the ceiling, and somewhere, far off, or maybe very close, she heard the faint sound of crying. It could have been the wind, but the house didn't creak like it used to. The forest no longer rustled, and the veil on the chair was slowly shifting, though the air was still. Claire closed her eyes, but sleep would not come easily again, and from the forest, the tree waited. Not for a bride, but for her. The village awoke slowly, like something old and arthritic, creaking to life beneath a mist that never quite lifted. Claire sat alone at the breakfast table, the porcelain cup in her hands cooling with untouched tea. The gifted veil lay folded beside her, its lace still damp from morning dew, or perhaps from something else. She had found it on the floor this morning, several feet from where she'd left it. "Sleep well?" Agda asked, entering with a rustle of herbs and the faint smell of ash. Claire hesitated. "I think I heard crying last night." Agda paused mid-step. Her expression didn't change, but her voice softened. "Sometimes the forest sings," she said nonchalantly. "Sometimes it remembers." Claire frowned. "That tree? The one in the woods? The girl gave me this veil. She said every bride must have one, that it was for the tree?" Agda didn't answer right away. Instead, she lit a small bundle of dried leaves over the stove and let the smoke curl toward the ceiling like a prayer. "Not every tradition is a superstition, child. Some are scars." "Scars?" Agda placed a plate of black bread in front of her and sat. "The tree is not evil, but it is hungry. It remembers the disobedient, the forgotten, the ones who said no." Claire stiffened. "Like Elira?" Agda looked up sharply. Claire had not meant to say the name. It had slipped, summoned by the old journal she'd been reading in secret, tucked away in the attic's crawlspace. The name hung in the air like incense smoke, old, heavy, unwelcome. Where did you hear that name? Claire swallowed. I found her diary. It was hidden in the wall. She talked about running away, about the Binding Rite. She never finished the last entry. Illyra was a wound this village never healed. She was punished, wasn't she, for refusing to marry someone she didn't love? She chose selfishness, and her curse brought famine. Blaming a starving harvest on a woman who didn't want to be forced into a marriage? Agda's voice darkened. It's not about what she wanted. It's about what the land needed. And the land needs sacrifice, order, blood when necessary. Claire stared at her. So the tree, what? Traps women's souls? Agda stood, suddenly tired. There are things beneath this village, beneath this land, that don't answer to your logic. And the tree was never meant to be questioned, only obeyed. She walked away before Claire could ask more. That afternoon, the whispers began. They weren't words, not exactly, more like the sound of breath passing through wood, soft, rhythmic, but impossible to place, like something old sighing through the trees. Claire followed it. She didn't mean to, but her feet led her back to the forest, past the cottages, past the crumbling stone fence that marked the village's boundary. Every step she took silenced another bird. By the time she reached the tree, the air was still. It was larger than she remembered, or maybe she had shrunk. The bark was cracked and blackened, gnarled in the shape of reaching arms. The chains that wrapped around it were rusted but firm, held together by thick nails and crimson ribbon. The veils, there were more now, dozens, maybe hundreds. They fluttered even though there was no wind. Claire stepped closer. The moment her foot touched the edge of the roots, the sound changed. The whisper became a voice, soft, feminine, familiar. Don't let them bind another. Claire froze. She turned in every direction, heart pounding, throat dry. The voice was everywhere and nowhere, inside her head, beneath her skin, curling behind her ears like damp breath. Then, he's not ready. He doesn't see, but the tree does. She backed away. Her shoe caught on a root and she fell, catching herself on the damp earth. Her hand landed in something soft, cold. A strip of lace. Her veil. The gifted one. But it wasn't just lace now. Threads of it were tangled in the bark, grown into the tree like veins. Red fibers pulsated faintly beneath the surface. Claire stumbled to her feet and ran. She didn't stop until she reached the edge of the village, chest heaving, hands shaking. The trees behind her stood silent and still, but she swore she could feel them watching, listening. That night, she confronted Noah. He had just returned from the elder meeting, face flushed, collar damp with sweat. He looked tired but content, like someone who had been accepted into something larger than himself. We need to talk about the tree. He chuckled. Let me guess, it's creepy. Too many veils, makes weird noises. It spoke to me. He raised an eyebrow. I'm serious. There's something wrong with that place. And your grandmother, she talks about blood and sacrifice like it's a wedding gift. They think if I don't do this ritual, your entire bloodline will rot in the ground. Noah exhaled. Claire, I know this is weird, but it's tradition. You don't have to believe in it. You just have to do it. One touch, that's all. It keeps the peace. Is that why you came back here? To keep peace with people who rush up a haunted tree? Noah's face hardened. These are my people. You're marrying me, not them. I'm marrying us, our future, our families, our roots. Clutter felt something inside her twist. The way he said, roots. Do you even know what the Binding Rite is? He hesitated. Some old custom. Brides were used to be presented to the land to ensure fertility and harvest. But that's just symbolic now. No, it wasn't symbolic. They chained Illyra to the tree. He laughed nervously. That's not... Her bones are still there. I found them, or I felt them. That tree remembers. He shook his head. You're letting fear write the story. Claire's voice dropped. Maybe the story was always written in fear. That night, the whispers returned. Louder, closer. Claire sat up in bed, unable to breathe. The window creaked open by itself. Moonlight poured in. From the shadows of the trees, she saw movement. A figure in white. A woman, standing perfectly still, face veiled, dress torn. Her body was wrong, slightly twisted, slightly hovering. Her arms dangled too long. Her fingers ended in blackened bark. Claire opened her mouth to scream, but the woman lifted one arm and placed a finger against her lips. "Finish the ritual," she whispered, "or the tree will choose."
The attic was cold, even though the summer heat still pressed against the village like wet cloth. Claire lit a candle. She didn't want to use the flashlight on her phone anymore. Light from screens felt sterile, incapable of reaching the kinds of shadows this place held. The journal she had found was wedged between two rotting beams, hidden behind an old bridal trunk, sealed with twine and wax. Its pages smelled of damp earth and dried lavender. The ink, faded but legible, trembled in places where the writer's hand had clearly shaken. The handwriting curled like vines, elegant but desperate. Illyra Hawthorne, March 3rd, 1926. The first page bore only that name. No title, no address, no explanation. Just a quiet declaration, like a grave marker left unsigned. They say I should be grateful, that I'm chosen, that to be a bride in this village is to be part of something older than time. But I've felt the tree watching me since I first bled. It knows my name. It hums it through the wind. And in my dreams, it chains my hands and whispers vows I never said. Claire read deep into the night, candlelight flickering against the cracked window pane. Each entry painted a picture of a girl crumbling beneath the weight of ceremony. A girl who once believed in love, but found herself bartered like wheat for weather. Illyra had been promised to a man she barely knew, a widower older than her father. The villagers said it was a blessed match, that his first wife had been taken too soon, and the land demanded another union. Not a funeral, a wedding, a replacement. They dressed me in her gown, her veil. They told me the tree had accepted it, that the first wife had been a good offering. They meant it. They really did. The night before the ceremony, I went to the tree and begged. I wept at its roots. I gave it my blood. I gave it my name. And in return, it showed me her face, twisted in bark, mouth open in a scream that had no sound. I ran, and now they hunt me. That was the last entry. The final page was half torn, as if someone had tried to rip the truth away before it could be finished. Claire clutched the book to her chest. This wasn't just folklore. It was confession, not a myth, a memory buried beneath ribbons and silence. The tree didn't symbolize punishment. It held it, preserved it, fed on it. And now, Claire feared it was hungry again. She confronted Noah the next morning. He stood in the old well house, helping the villagers prepare the blessing rings, small braids of corn husk and twine hung in doorways to protect newlyweds. He looked content, peaceful even. But Claire couldn't let him stay in that peace. "This wedding isn't about us," she said, voice low.
It's about the land, about sacrifice." Noah blinked. "Claire, you're reading too much into old stories. Illyria was real. She was killed. She wrote about the tree, about the ritual, and she wasn't the first. That tree is a graveyard wrapped in veils." Noah paused. "Even if all that were true, it's not like that anymore. Things changed. The rite is symbolic now." Claire held up the journal. "Then why is her soul still there?" Silence. The villagers glanced up at the sound of her voice. Their hands paused, their eyes narrowed. She had said too much, but there was no turning back. "I'm not doing it," she whispered to Noah. "I won't touch that thing. I won't kneel before it. I won't chain myself to a curse." Noah's face darkened, not with anger, but with something colder. Resignation. Then the tree will take what it's owed. That night, the binding rite was performed without her. Claire awoke to drums, soft, hollow, like heartbeat echoes through bone. She peered from the attic window and saw torches winding into the forest. A procession of white-robed figures moved silently between the trees, and at the front was Noah. He wore no expression. His hands were bound in white cloth. Behind him, the elders carried a wooden effigy shaped like a bride, head bowed, arms crossed, body wrapped in white silk streaked with red. They were going to bind something, even if it wasn't her. Claire threw on her boots and ran. The forest swallowed her whole. The deeper she pushed through, the stranger the sounds became. Insects chirped backward. Wind moved in loops. Her own heartbeat echoed twice. The ground pulsed beneath her, not like earth, but like skin. And then she saw it, the tree. A colossus of bark and blood and iron. Its veils whipped like wings, and from within its trunk came a sound like weeping and whispering, overlapping, female, ageless. The villagers encircled it. The bride effigy was set at its roots. The drums ceased. An elder stepped forward, holding a rusted nail. "Bride of the land, we offer you this shape in place of flesh, in silence, in sorrow, in sacred obedience." They lowered the effigy, and the tree moved. Its bark cracked. A slit opened near its base, revealing a hollow that pulsed like a mouth. The crying grew louder. The veils reached. Claire screamed. They turned. Too late. The effigy was already gone, swallowed whole, and the chains tightened around the tree's trunk as if it had just fed. Noah stared at her. His eyes were wet. "You weren't supposed to see that," he whispered. "Neither were you," she replied. Later, alone in the attic, Claire wept. The journal sat beside her, open to the final page. She traced the last sentence with her finger. "I ran, and now they hunt me." But Illyria hadn't been hunted. She had been bound. And unless Claire found a way to sever the rite, to end the cycle, she would be next. The morning after the binding rite felt off. It wasn't just the silence or the sky, which hung a little lower than it should have. It was the color of the air, that strange reddish hue, as though the dawn had forgotten how to rise clean. A haze bled across the village like old rust, tinting every stone wall and window pane in tones of dried blood. Claire stepped outside and knew immediately something had shifted. No birds, no dogs barking, no distant bleat of goats, only the wind, thick and slow, carrying the scent of something scorched. She walked toward the well where the villagers usually gathered in the early hours, but no one was there. The water bucket stood still. The prayer ribbons hanging from the post had turned black overnight, stiff and burned at the edges. And then she saw the barn. It was open. The animals inside were still, too still. She approached slowly, her stomach tightening with every step. Inside, the goats were collapsed in their pens, mouths open, eyes glazed white, limbs stiff and cold. The cows were slumped against the walls, tongues swollen. The chickens lay in perfect feathered rows, as if something had arranged them after they died. No blood, no wounds, just silence. And from beneath their bodies oozed a thin line of black sap. Claire staggered back, covering her mouth. Whatever had happened last night, whatever was fed to the tree, it wasn't satisfied. Noah was missing. That became clear by midday. He hadn't returned home, hadn't been seen by the elders. Agda only said, "He's walking the path. He'll return when the tree lets go." Claire didn't know what that meant, but then she remembered the last look in his eyes, that soft glaze, as though he'd fallen asleep standing. The way he'd whispered, "You weren't supposed to see that." He wasn't Noah anymore, at least not fully. She searched the forest until her legs gave out. The branches above shifted restlessly, even though there was no wind. Leaves fell in slow spirals. The tree loomed like a monument to some forgotten god, the veils now darker, streaked with something fresh, something red. Claire didn't go near it. Instead, she followed the trail of torn white cloth leading into the woods. It wasn't much, a thread here, a scrap there, but it felt deliberate, as though someone wanted her to follow. And then she found the shoes. Wedding shoes. Polished black leather, laced neatly, tucked beneath a crooked root like an offering. They were Noah's. Claire knelt, heart pounding. One of the shoes was wet, not with blood, but with sap, the same sap she'd seen beneath the animals. She touched it. It clung to her fingers like syrup, thick, cold, almost vibrating. When she tried to wipe it off, it left behind a dark stain that shimmered in the light. And in the silence, a whisper curled from the trees. "He said your name. He gave it to the tree." Claire froze. The voice wasn't loud. It wasn't even outside her. It was inside the bark, inside the roots, inside her. "He said your name. He gave it to the tree." Back at the house, she stripped off her clothes and scrubbed her hands raw. The sap wouldn't fade. No matter how much she washed, it clung beneath her nails, staining her cuticles black. In the mirror, her reflection looked thinner, paler, and behind her, on the wooden chair where her wedding veil had been draped, something was growing. She stepped closer. Her breath caught. It was the veil, but it wasn't fabric anymore. It had hardened into a bark-like texture, still shaped like lace, but stiff and veined with red threads. Tiny buds had formed along the hem, blooming into ghost-white flowers that trembled when she moved. She reached out to touch it. It twitched. She jerked her hand back. And then, from the center of the veil, came a small voice, soft, sobbing. "Help me!" She burned the veil in the fireplace, but it didn't burn like cloth. It cracked and shrieked, not in flame, but in light, pale, cold light. The smoke smelled of lilies and rot. The sobbing stopped, but only for a while. That night she dreamed of Illyra, not the girl in the journal, but a woman with no face, no mouth, only a veil that flowed like river water. Her arms were bound in chains, her feet were rooted in soil, and from her chest a tree grew, slowly splitting her open, branch by branch. She opened her arms to Claire and whispered, "Finish what they started, or be next." Claire woke gasping. At the foot of the bed, her wedding gown had been laid out, pressed, clean, ready. But the veil was no longer burned. It had regrown, longer this time, and already attached to the dress. Something borrowed, something dead. The morning of the wedding came without light. The sky hung low and bruised, pulsing with a sickly crimson hue, as if the sun had been replaced by a wound. Claire stood in front of the mirror, barely recognizing herself. The gown clung too tightly. The veil, which she had burned just days ago, now draped over her shoulders as though it had never been gone. Its fabric shimmered with faint veins of bark, and when she moved, it whispered, not against her skin, but into her ear. "He's waiting." Her fingers trembled as she applied makeup she no longer cared about. Every brushstroke felt like painting a mask on a corpse. Her reflection looked less like a bride and more like a sacrifice. Downstairs, the village buzzed with eerie excitement. People moved quickly, but spoke softly, their voices never rising above a murmur. White ribbons flapped on door frames, bells hung in bundles of 9, and every threshold had been dusted with a fine gray powder that smelled of ash and something older. Agda greeted her with a wreath of dried white roses and thorny vines. For purity, for protection. Claire didn't take it. Agda didn't insist. Noah hadn't returned. Everyone pretended otherwise. The village elder stood in his place at the altar, a hollow-eyed man named Marith, who walked with a limp and smelled like wet stone. "He's in the forest. He'll join you at the tree." At the tree. Not the chapel, not the garden. The tree. The ceremony had been relocated without her consent. A wedding, they said, but Claire knew better now. This wasn't a union, it was an offering, and if she didn't show up, the tree would come for her anyway. So she walked. The forest path was lined with villagers holding candles made of bone wax and black string. They didn't smile, didn't blink, just watched her pass as if she were already part of the roots. The air was thick with mist, humming low like a buried choir. Every step felt heavier. Her shoes sank into the soil, not mud, but something softer, something that squished. She didn't look down. She didn't want to know what she was walking on. The clearing appeared like a wound torn open in the earth, and there it stood, the bride tree, now larger than ever, its bark splitting to reveal glimpses of white beneath, like bones trying to push through skin. Chains clinked softly in the windless air. Veils fluttered like sails soaked in milk and blood. And at its base, Noah. He stood barefoot, wearing a ceremonial robe laced with roots and dried flowers. His eyes were open, but unfocused, pupils dilated, lips slightly parted as if caught mid-vow. Claire ran to him. He didn't move. "Noah," she whispered, grasping his hands. They were ice cold. But then, his mouth twitched, his lips moved, and from them came a whisper. "With this vow, I take the land." Claire pulled away. "Noah, it's me! Wake up!" But he kept speaking. With this vow, I take the hunger. With this vow, I bury her name, and wear the veil of the forgotten. His voice wasn't his own. It was layered. His vocal cords carried two voices, one his, one feminine, older, strained. Illyra's? The villagers closed in, their candles flickered with blue flame. Mareth stepped forward, arms raised. "The bride has come," he said solemnly. "Let the land be sealed." Claire screamed, "No, I won't do this. You're binding him to a curse." "You already did when you refused the veil." He turned to the crowd. "Let her witness the ruin of defiance." And the sky split open. It started with a sound, a low rumble like thunder beneath the ground. The earth trembled, the tree shuddered and exhaled a gust of hot wind that reeked of spoiled milk and iron. Then the veils rose, not fell, rose, vertically, unnaturally, like marionettes yanked by invisible strings. They formed a circle above Claire and Noah, swirling into a vortex of lace and rot, and the sky turned blood red. And it began to rain. Not water, but petals. Pale, soft petals that dissolved into ash the moment they touched skin. The animals in the village screamed. The river reversed. And Noah, eyes rolling back, let out a long guttural moan as roots exploded from his chest. He collapsed, unconscious or something worse. And from the base of the tree, a new veil unfurled, not woven, but grown. It slithered across the ground toward her. "No!" Claire shouted. She turned to run, but the villagers made no move to stop her. They simply watched because they knew something she didn't. The forest doesn't chase, it waits. She didn't remember how she got back, only that when she burst through the cottage door, Agda was already waiting by the fire, knitting with a thread that looked suspiciously like hair. Claire collapsed to the floor. "What did you do to him?" Agda sighed. "He was never yours to keep." Claire rose, trembling. "I still hear him. He said my name." Agda met her eyes. For the first time, something like regret flickered behind them. "Then you have one chance. Finish the ritual, not their way, yours. Bind the tree to truth, or it will bind him to silence." Claire didn't answer. She just wept. And outside, the red sky burned until morning. The forest would not let her sleep. Even with the windows barred and the door bolted, Claire could hear it, not through sound, but sensation, like a low vibration beneath the floorboards, threading through her spine, rising through her throat like sap through a dying tree. She lay curled on the attic floor, Illyra's journal pressed to her chest, as though it might offer protection or forgiveness. But the tree had already marked her. Every dream bled into memory. Every memory cracked open like rotting bark. She dreamed of the wedding again, only this time she wasn't walking toward the altar. She was beneath it, underground, wrapped in white lace, arms pinned to her sides with rusted chains, mouth stuffed with red petals, eyes open but blind. Above her, the villagers sang. Above her, the tree drank rain that smelled like blood. and from within the soil came a voice, soft, hoarse, muffled by centuries. "You left me there." Claire awoke screaming. The attic was dark, but not empty. A shape stood in the far corner, still, watching. It took her several heartbeats to realize it wasn't a person. It was the veil again, but it had grown taller, now draped over a wooden dress form that hadn't been there before. Its lace trailed across the floor like roots. Beneath it, something pulsed. And then the crying started. Not a loud sob, but a quiet, gasping whimper. A woman's voice. "Please, don't let them bind another." Claire backed away, hands trembling. "Who are you?" No answer. Only the slow rustle of veils shifting in a wind that didn't exist. She lifted the journal with shaking hands and turned to the last entry, the one that had always ended mid-sentence. But tonight, there were new words, written in fresh, wet ink. "They hollowed me out. They buried my name, but the tree remembers. You are not the first, but you can be the last." Claire dropped the book. That morning she returned to the tree, not with the village, not in ceremony, alone. The path was different now, twisted, overgrown, rearranged, as if the forest itself was reshaping its arteries, guiding her to the place it wanted her to bleed. When she reached the clearing, the tree stood silent and enormous, swollen with moisture, its bark darker than before, veined with streaks of deep crimson. Claire stepped forward. She didn't wait. She touched it. And the world split open. Visions poured in like water over cracked stone. She saw women, dozens, in white, standing beneath the tree through the ages, all different faces, same fate, bound, veiled, sacrificed. One by one, their souls were pulled into the trunk, and within that trunk was Illyra, still veiled, still weeping, still chained. Her mouth was sewn shut with thread made of her own hair. Her eyes glowed faintly. Her body was twisted into the bark itself, like a figure pressed into amber. She looked at Claire, and through the closed lips, Claire heard her. "Help me, finish it." Claire stumbled back, gasping. The bark where she had placed her hand had softened, almost like flesh. Embedded deep within it was something white. She reached in. It was a finger bone, wrapped in lace. Carved into the bone, barely visible, was a name. Illyra. She crumpled to her knees, overcome by the sudden weight of inherited grief. They had never buried her. They had fed her to the tree. Back at the cottage, Agda said nothing when Claire entered. The old woman simply placed a warm cloth in her hands and whispered, "You saw her, didn't you?" Claire nodded, hollow-eyed. "She's still in there." Agda stirred the fire, voice low. "Some souls don't burn. They root, especially when no one says their name out loud for 100 years. Claire clenched her fists. "You knew, you all knew, and you still let them do it, to her, to me, to Noah." Agda's hand stilled. "It wasn't always like this," she murmured. "Once the tree was a symbol, a guardian, but pain rewrites the meaning of things. And once Illyra's blood touched its roots, it changed, became hungry." Claire's voice cracked. "Then let me end it." Agda looked up, eyes sharp. "You can't unbind what was done, but you can finish the rite on your own terms." Claire's breath caught. "What do I have to do?" The answer came not from Agda, but from the journal. That night, its final page rewrote itself once more.
and the message was clear. Write new vows, bind the truth, speak my name aloud, burn the veils, and bleed willingly. Claire closed the book. Her tears stopped, not from peace, but from purpose. The bride tree had buried too many women beneath its roots. She would be the last. The first to disappear was a child, a boy of 7, red-haired, freckled, curious beyond safety. His mother said he'd gone to feed the hens and never came back. They found his footprints by the forest's edge, leading in, but no prints led out. The search was half-hearted, as if the village already knew. Claire watched from the cottage window as the villagers gathered around the well, heads low, hands clenched. The boy's name wasn't spoken, only the same phrase repeated like a benediction. The land remembers. The land reclaims. Claire wandered through the village, numb, her body moving while her spirit lagged behind. She saw signs of the trees growing hunger. The crops were turning black from the root up. Birds flew in jagged patterns overhead, confused and spiraling downward. Dogs howled all night, then fell silent by morning. Even the river had gone still. Its surface now reflected nothing. And on the trunks of trees near the forest's edge, someone or something had begun carving names. Old names, bride names, Elira, Bruna, Mael, Isolde. And beneath them, space for one more. Claire. She found Noah 3 days later, or what remained of him. He stood in the clearing, facing the bride tree. He wasn't tied or chained. He wasn't guarded. He simply stood, barefoot, mouth slightly open, clothes damp with dew, and his eyes rolled entirely white. No pupil, no iris, just a blank, gleaming membrane. Claire called to him. He didn't turn. She stepped closer, her voice cracking. "Noah, it's me, it's Claire." Still nothing. She reached out and touched his hand. He flinched, just slightly. And then he spoke. "With this vow I take her silence. With this vow I bury her name. With this vow I forget my own." Claire staggered back. His voice was layered again, his and hers, Elira's. But this time, another voice bled through. The trees, low, hollow, a sound made of wind through rotted wood. "Take root or take nothing." Claire screamed. "No, he didn't choose this." The tree groaned, a deep, thunderous creak as if its trunk was cracking from the inside. Noah fell to his knees, then to his side, unconscious but alive. Claire ran to him, cradling his head in her lap, rocking him like a mother trying to comfort a dying child. His eyelids fluttered, and then, for a single heartbeat, his eyes cleared. He looked at her and whispered, "Burn the veil," then went still. That night, the veil moved on its own. Claire had stuffed it into a drawer and wrapped it in salt, herbs, and iron, every protection she could remember from Elira's writings. But it slithered out. When she awoke, it was stretched across her chest like a second skin. She tore it off, screaming, and saw the stain it left, a black ring around her finger, like a wedding band inked in poison.
The villagers stopped speaking to her. They passed her without a word, their eyes glazed, their mouths twitching with unfinished chants. The baker no longer opened his shutters. The bell tower rang 13 times instead of 12. Something was unraveling, and still the tree stood, waiting. Agda grew weaker. She barely rose from her chair, her breath shallow, her bones brittle. Claire sat beside her one evening, wrapped in silence, waiting for the old woman to speak. At last, Agda opened her eyes. "There's still time. For him? For you." Claire swallowed. "How do I finish it?" Agda's hand reached out, grasping hers with surprising strength. "Not by running, not by burning, but by rewriting." Rewriting what? Agda looked at her as if the answer should be obvious. The vow. Claire returned to the tree before dawn, alone. She carried no veil, no gown, no ring, only her voice and the truth. She stood before the twisted bark and whispered, "I won't be your bride. I won't carry your curse. I speak her name, Illyra Hawthorne. She was a woman, not an offering." The tree trembled. Its veils hissed like serpents, and beneath her feet the earth cracked open, just slightly. From the soil rose a root, slow, deliberate. It slithered toward her ankle like a hand reaching for her. But it stopped, waiting, as if asking, "What now?" Claire bent to the ground, and from her pocket she pulled out a silver pin, one that had belonged to Illyra. She pressed it to her finger and bled.
Blood touched the soil, and the earth flinched. Just a pinprick from Claire's finger, a single drop, absorbed instantly into the ground as if the forest had been waiting, parched and eager. The root beneath her feet pulsed once, then twice. Then it opened, not like a door, like a wound. A long split cracked along the forest floor, revealing a hollow cavity beneath the tree, veiled in mist, heavy with breathless heat. The air that rose from it was not of the forest. It smelled of iron, salt, and morming. Claire stepped back. The opening pulsed again, a heart too large, too old, too buried. And then she heard it, not a whisper, not a voice, a wail. She descended without knowing how. One moment she stood beneath the tree, the next she was inside it. The hollow was alive. Its walls were formed of bark and bridal silk, layered over with chains and bones. Veils hung like lungs, slowly expanding and collapsing with the rhythm of breath. Light filtered through cracks in the bark high above, casting narrow beams across the floor, where something pale lay curled in the roots. Claire stepped closer. It was a body. Folded neatly, gown still intact, fingers clasped around a bouquet of dried lilies. The veil over her face was fused to her skin, grown in place like a second dermis. Claire dropped to her knees. Illyra. The name echoed through the hollow, reverberating like a spell spoken for the first time. The body moved, only slightly, just enough to make the chains shiver. Illyra's fingers twitched, then curled into a fist. From her mouth came a sound not quite human, a gasp pulled through centuries of silence. Claire reached for her, but the moment her fingers touched the veil, the hollow collapsed inward. She was pulled into memory, not her own, Illyra's.
She stood at the edge of a clearing, 20 years old, breath sharp with panic. Behind her, villagers holding chains. Ahead, the tree, newly crowned with its first veil. It was the night of the original Binding Rite. She saw it all not like a film, but like it was happening to her. Illyra screaming, fighting, begging, her wrists bound, her name erased. "You'll save the land," they said. "You'll thank us one day." The chains bit into her skin. The tree opened. They placed her inside. Then they sealed it, alive. Claire awoke on the floor of the hollow, sweating, crying, shaking. Illyra's body still lay beside her, but the veil had loosened. One eye peeked through, cloudy but open. Claire wiped her tears and whispered, "I saw you." Illyra blinked once, slow. Then her lips moved, dry, cracked. No voice came, only breath. But Claire understood. Finish what they began. Burn the veils. Bind the tree to truth. Claire stood, bones aching, mind blazing. She turned to leave, but something stopped her. Beneath the roots, behind Illyra's body, a small satchel wrapped in silk and sealed with wax. Claire opened it. Inside were the original wedding vows, handwritten, water-damaged, but intact, and stained with blood. Back above ground, the forest had changed. The trees now bent toward the bride tree, their branches hooked and twitching. The sky overhead had dulled to a sickly gray. The village bell rang once, then shattered. Claire knew what she had to do. She returned to the cottage and laid the vows on the table, and beside them she placed a blank page. That night she wrote new ones, not for a groom, not for a god, not for the land, for Illyra, for herself. I vow to speak what was silenced. I vow to name the forgotten. I vow to burn what was never holy. I vow to bind the truth, not the bride. I vow to end the feast. At midnight, she returned to the clearing. She wore white, not the gown they gave her, but one she stitched herself from torn bedsheets and old curtains. Around her neck she wore a necklace of small bones, Illyra's finger bone at its center. The tree groaned as she approached. Its chains rattled, its veils rived. She lit the match and held the vows to the flame. They caught instantly, a blaze of red-orange fire, crackling, hissing. And as the last word burned away, the tree screamed. From its trunk burst a jet of black sap, spraying the clearing in a foul, steaming arc. The veils caught fire, one by one, igniting like dry leaves in autumn. The forest howled, and beneath the bride tree, the earth opened once more. Claire fell to her knees. She whispered one final name into the soil. Illyra. The wind stopped, the roots stilled, and for the first time in a century, the tree was silent. The fire had ended, but the screams lingered. Claire woke the next morning with soot on her hands and ash in her mouth, as if the forest had tried to bury itself inside her during the night. Her dress was torn, her lips were cracked, her legs ached from kneeling too long in prayer or punishment. She could no longer tell which. The tree had stopped whispering. That should have brought peace, but it didn't. Instead, everything else began to bleed. The first signs came from the fields. Rows of golden corn withered overnight, wheat shriveled to black husks. The grapevines, once heavy with fruit, now bore only pale, translucent skins, hollow as shed cicada shells. When the villagers cut open the pumpkins, they found flesh soaked in blood, thick and clotting. The harvest had turned to rot, and the rot had turned to fear. They came to Claire's door the next afternoon, not with pitchforks, but with flowers. White ones. Dozens. All left in silence on the doorstep, like an offering or a warning. Claire didn't open the door. She knew what they meant. Fix it, or take her place. Inside, she tried to tend to Noah. He had not yet woken. He lay curled on the bed like a child, skin pale, breath shallow, eyes twitching behind closed lids. Sometimes he spoke, but the words made no sense. With this root, I drink her voice. The bells are still ringing. The veil is inside now. She held his hand and whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep. Outside, the sky hung bruised and bitter. Thunder rumbled without clouds. The wind carried the stench of rotting harvest and burning silk. And under it all, a sound had returned. Not from the tree, from underground. Something still moved. Claire sought out Agda, but the cottage was empty. The hearth had gone cold. The windows were broken. And carved into the wall above the bed was a single word: replacement. Not a threat, a ritual role. In every generation, one must carry the burden. When the tree was fed, the land flourished. When the bride was bound, the village thrived. Now the bride had burned the veil, and the land demanded blood. By dusk, the elders came. They stood in the clearing behind her cottage, clad in ceremonial white, their faces painted with ash and sap. At the center of them stood Merith, elder priest, bearer of the village's rites. "You've unbound the tree," he said. Claire stood her ground. "I freed her. I gave her name back. Uncursed us all. The curse was yours, not hers." His eyes narrowed. "We have 3 days before the full moon. The binding rite must be restored before then, or the land will collapse." Claire laughed, dry, hollow. "So you'll chain another woman to a corpse tree and pray the rain comes back?" Merith stepped forward. "You misunderstand, child. The land no longer wants a bride." He pointed behind her. "It wants the one who broke the marriage." That night, they came. Not with ropes, but with fire. They stood in the field beyond her cottage and lit torches, sang hymns she did not know. Their voices were broken, brittle, like glass rattling in the throat. She watched from the attic window, clutching the fingerbone necklace. Her own name rang through the night, chanted like a sacrament. "Claire, Claire, bring back the veil." She waited until they left. Then she returned to the tree. It looked different now, hollowed, darker. Its bark had peeled back in large patches, revealing a smooth red wood beneath, raw and wet, as if newly born. The chains no longer rattled. They sagged, like the tree was growing weaker. And under its roots, a sound, soft, wet, weeping. Claire knelt, placed both hands on the dirt, and whispered, "I gave your name back. I burned the vow. What do you need now?" The ground pulsed beneath her, then parted. From the soil rose a child's toy, wooden, carved by hand, a spinning top. The boy, the red-haired boy who vanished days ago. His soul was still beneath. Claire dug with her bare hands, screaming into the night, but no body came. Only a small, pale root, shaped like a finger. The tree wasn't just a prison. It had become a grave. And now that its feast had ended, it was starving.
The first words Noah spoke when he opened his eyes again were not his. "With this vow I take the hunger." Claire froze. She had been wiping his brow with a damp cloth, humming softly, trying to tether herself to something human. But the moment his lips parted, that voice returned, layered and hollow, like several people speaking through one throat. Noah blinked, but he didn't look at her. He looked through her and whispered, "With this vow I bury the name of the first bride and take her place." She stepped back, breath caught in her throat. "Noah," she said. Nothing. She tried again. "Noah, it's Claire. Do you know me?" He tilted his head slowly. Then he smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "The veil fits you now." That night he vanished again. Claire had dozed off in the chair beside the bed, and when she woke, the room was empty. The window had been forced open from the inside. The floor bore muddy footprints, bare, heel-dragging, leading out into the night. She followed them into the woods. No lantern, no shoes, only the cold, and her husband's voice echoing between the trees, soft as thread unraveling in the dark. "With this vow I forget my own name. With this vow I take hers." She found him standing at the tree, his back to her, hands lifted, veil on his head. Not his veil, Illyra's, somehow whole again. Claire didn't speak. She just watched. Noah began to sway, and then he sang. Not words, not melody, just sound, long, slow, aching, like a lullaby meant to soothe the dead. The tree responded. It groaned, split slightly at the base, and from within its hollow came a whisper, not female, not male, something in between. "Return the vessel, return the vow, return the voice." Claire stepped forward. "Noah, you have to stop." He didn't move. She reached out, grabbed his hand, cold and damp, and pulled the veil from his head. He collapsed like a puppet cut from its strings. She dragged him back to the cottage, weeping, but even unconscious, he spoke, over and over in his sleep. "The veil is not cloth, it is skin. It must cover the mouth, it must silence the scream." The next morning, Claire opened the last few pages of Illyra's journal and found sketches. Not words, drawings of roots shaped like hands, trees with open mouths, brides stitched shut, a figure with no face holding a veil of teeth, and behind one page, folded tightly, a child's drawing, crude, old, but signed Noah. Claire's blood ran cold. The drawing showed a tree, a bride, a circle of villagers, and at the bottom, a small figure, watching, smiling. Noah had seen the ritual. He had watched the Binding Rite as a child. He had drawn it.
He had always known. Claire confronted Agda. This time there was no politeness left. You let him marry me knowing this curse would take him. The old woman did not deny it. He was chosen, as were you. Chosen to be consumed, to fulfill the covenant. The tree needed a voice, a body, a name. 2 parts make the whole. Claire felt sick. You married us to feed the tree? Agda nodded, tears in her eyes. We kept the land alive. What would you have had us do? Starve? Claire shook her head. No, you didn't keep it alive. You fed it silence. She returned to the field that night, but not to pray, to dig. She clawed at the soil with bare hands until her nails broke, until blood ran down her wrists. And then she found it. A second satchel, just like Illyra's. Inside, another set of vows, but these weren't written by Illyra. They were signed by someone else, for the groom. Claire's hands trembled. She opened them and read, I vow to wear her name. I vow to carry her veil. I vow to bury my voice and speak only hers. The truth hit her like a falling bell. This was never a marriage between 2 people. It was a ritual between a man and the curse. Every generation, 1 bride, 1 groom, 1 voice to be silenced, 1 voice to be taken. The land didn't want love, it wanted obedience. And Noah, my Noah, was never meant to survive it. She burned the second set of vows that night, not in anger, in mourning. And as they turned to ash, the wind shifted, the air grew warm, and somewhere deep within the tree, something growled, like hunger, interrupted. It began with the roots. Claire woke to the sound of wood creaking beneath the floorboards, not the usual groans of an old cottage settling in the night, but something deeper. Alive. She stepped out of bed and felt it instantly. The floor pulsed, like a heartbeat beneath her feet. She dropped to her knees, pressed her palm to the floor, and heard it. Feed me. A whisper. Not loud, not sharp, just inevitable. Outside, the earth had begun to crack. Thin fissures stretched through the fields like veins, weaving between houses, splitting roads, swallowing fence posts. The villagers gathered at the chapel steps, silent, wrapped in shawls and grief, watching the horizon darken even as the sun rose. No birds sang, no insects hummed. The land had gone quiet, except for the tree. It wailed now, day and night. Its bark peeled in long strips. The veils burned one by one, crumbling to ash mid-air. From its hollow black sap leaked continuously, soaking the ground and curdling the grass. And beneath it all, the low chant of hunger. Bind, replace, obey. Claire stood at the center of the cottage, staring at the spinning top on the shelf. The boy's toy she'd found in the roots. It spun by itself now, constantly, without touch. A warning, or a countdown. She looked at Noah. He hadn't spoken since she burned the groom's vows, but he had begun moving. In his sleep, his hands would rise and fall in rhythm. His lips would purse, then open, not to breathe, but to mouth something. Silent words, forgotten language. And when she leaned close, she heard a second breath, layered beneath his own, as if something else were breathing through him. That afternoon, the villagers returned. Not all, just the oldest. Their faces were painted with clay and charcoal, their eyes rimmed in red ash. At their center, Merith, holding a knife. It was carved from bone and engraved with a single word, bride. Claire stood in the doorway. "I said no," she told them. Merith didn't blink. "You said no to the veil. You said no to the vow. But the land has not heard your answer. I gave it Illyra's name. I gave it truth." "And what did it give you in return?" he asked. Claire's mouth dried. Merith gestured behind him to the cracked fields, the dying trees, the children too weak to stand. "It is not death that curses us. It is your defiance." Claire stepped forward. "You've fed this land for generations with silence, with women's lives, with lies, and now it's starving on truth." Merith raised the bone knife. "Then we must return to the lie." That night, Claire prepared. She knew what had to be done. She stitched her own veil, not from lace, but from the burned scraps of Illyra's gown. She wore white again, this time soaked in ash and sap. Around her waist, she tied a belt of roots, and around her neck, the necklace of bone. She walked barefoot. No one stopped her. The village watched from behind windows, because deep down, they knew. The tree was hungrier than it had ever been, and it would eat the entire village if she didn't go willingly. The clearing was darker now. No moonlight reached it. The tree stood taller, not physically, but spiritually. Its presence had grown, its hollow mouth stretched wide, drooling sap, its bark pulsing like lungs gasping for air. Claire stepped into the circle. The ground closed behind her, and the forest held its breath. She knelt at the roots, hands folded, eyes closed, and began to speak. "I come of my own will. I bear no vow but my truth. I speak her name, not mine. I offer not my silence, but her voice. I take this not as sacrifice, but as ending." The tree shrieked. Its trunk split violently, vomiting black sap across the clearing. Veils burst into flame, chains snapped and flew like thrown blades. The roots rose, wrapped around Claire's legs, then her arms. They didn't pull her down, they held her there, suspended, mid-air, as the bark peeled back to reveal a second face. Inside the tree, grown into its core, was Illyra. Eyes open, mouth unstitched, screaming. But the scream made no sound until Claire leaned forward and whispered, "It's yours now. Take it back." The scream filled the forest, not with sound, but with wind. A cyclone of ash and petals erupted from the clearing. Trees bent, ground cracked, the chapel bell rang without hands, and every villager fell to their knees, clutching their chests, because in that scream was every bride's name, every forgotten vow, every silenced voice, all of them rising,
The tree began to collapse, not fall, collapse, from the inside. Its bark caved inward, sucked into itself, like a wound finally closing around the infection it had harbored for a century. The veils burned, the chains melted, the roots turned to ash, and the voice was gone. Claire collapsed into the mud, exhausted, alone, alive. Back in the cottage, Noah opened his eyes. No white, just blue. Just him. He whispered, "Did it end?" Claire kissed his forehead. "No," she said softly. "It let go."
The tree was dead. At least, that's what the villagers whispered. They said it crumbled in the night, that its roots dried up, that the sap no longer bled. Some claimed the clearing was empty now, nothing but scorched earth and scattered petals. Others swore they saw it collapse inward like a dying lung, exhaling centuries of grief before vanishing altogether. Claire didn't speak. She knew the truth. The tree hadn't died. It had been unbound. And in its place, a silence remained, not empty, but sacred. The morning after, the village looked unfamiliar, not different, just exposed, like a house where all the furniture had been taken away, revealing stains on the floor no one had cleaned in years. The chapel's bell tower had collapsed. The fields were gray with ash. The river ran again, but its water smelled of iron and memory. Claire walked through the streets alone. Eyes followed her from shuttered windows, some in awe, some in resentment, all in fear. They had lost their God, and not everyone was ready to grieve it. Noah was awake now, but changed. He remembered pieces, flashes of the forest, veils brushing his skin, a voice in his mouth that wasn't his. He wept when Claire told him everything, then held her in silence for hours. That night, they burned the wedding dress. Not hers, Illyra's. The one stitched from stolen names, cursed rituals, and blood-soaked obedience. Claire laid it gently on a pyre of salt and branches beneath the broken tree stump. Noah lit the flame, and as the fire climbed, Claire spoke aloud. "You were never a bride. You were never a curse. You were never theirs. You are free." Ash rained gently across the clearing, like snowfall made of sorrow. In the days that followed, the villagers avoided her. No one thanked her. No one accused her. They simply began to rebuild, not from wood, but from superstition. New songs rose at night. Strange offerings reappeared on doorsteps. Teeth wrapped in cloth, dolls tied with red thread, jars of honey sealed with thorn stems, as if the tree had only been one head of a larger beast. The hunger of tradition remained, but Claire refused to feed it. Instead, she returned to the clearing, every day, alone, not to pray, to listen. And on the seventh day, something answered. Not a voice, a breeze, soft, warm, familiar. She turned and saw her, Illyra, not in chains, not in bark, free. She stood barefoot, veiled in light, her white gown tattered at the hem. Her eyes were whole now, her mouth unstained, Her hands were no longer bound. She smiled and whispered, "You gave me back my name." Claire stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "I was so late." Illyra shook her head. "You were the first one who chose. That's all the tree ever wanted." Claire's voice cracked. "I don't understand." Illyra looked past her to the village beyond the trees. To remember doesn't mean to obey. To honor doesn't mean to repeat. They thought the vow kept the land alive, but it was never the vow. She pointed to Claire's chest. It was the witness. Then she turned and walked into the light. Claire never saw her again, but every time the wind shifted, she smelled lilies in the air. The villagers tried, in time, to rebuild their rituals. They whispered new stories to replace the old, but something had changed. The land no longer listened the way it used to. There were no more binding rites, no more chained brides, no more veils nailed to trees. The harvests were slower, but honest, and that was enough. One evening, Claire and Noah sat beside the stump. It had grown moss around its edges. A single flower bloomed in the center. Claire placed her palm over the cut wood and whispered, "No chains, no vows, no more." Then she untied the bone necklace from her neck and buried it beneath the roots. That night, she dreamed of a forest with no paths, just open ground, and a girl in white running not from fear, but toward something. She was laughing, free.
The invitations were never sent. No bells rang, no feast was prepared, but the entire village knew the date. They woke to white ribbon tied across the chapel door, torn, frayed, dipped in ash. A veil hung beside it, pinned with thorns, fluttering like a ghost refusing to rest. No one touched it. No one dared remove it. Claire had stitched it herself. The final veil. Not to wear, but to burn. She dressed that morning in silence. Noah helped button the back of her dress. It was simple, linen, hand-dyed with crushed flower petals and river clay. The kind of dress no tradition could own. She braided her hair with pieces of thread salvaged from Illyra's journal. Not words, fragments, bits of sentences too damaged to read, too sacred to discard. Her bouquet was not flowers, it was bones. Cleaned, polished, tied with black ribbon. A bouquet of names. Names erased, names buried, names she had learned to speak. She walked alone. No bridesmaids, no procession. Just the forest, watching. The clearing was still scorched from the burning. The stump of the bride tree sat like an open grave, its hollow dark and wet. But it didn't breathe anymore. It didn't whisper. It simply waited. Claire stepped into the circle. She stood where the altar once was, where so many had knelt in fear, in silence, in sacrifice. She did not kneel. She rose. She began the ceremony. I come not to marry. I come not to bind. I come not to wear the veil. I come to remember, to reclaim, to refuse. Her voice was calm, steady. It echoed through the trees like a hymn no god had ever heard. One by one, the villagers appeared, not to stop her, to witness. Some held their children, some held their hands, some held nothing at all. They stood at the edge of the woods, faces pale, uncertain, unsure if they were watching a wedding, a funeral, or something in between. Claire didn't look at them.
She spoke only to the stump, to the ghosts, to the wind. She took the veil from her shoulders, held it high. "This is not my silence." She tore it in half. "This is not my shame." She tore it again. "This is not my inheritance." And once more, until it was threadbare. "This is not my vow." She set the pieces alight. The flames rose, blue, then white, then silver. Smoke curled upward into the morning sky like a spirit finally departing. And when it cleared, the stump was gone. In its place stood a single sprout, green, tender, alive. A tree reborn, not from sacrifice, but from memory. Claire stepped back and opened her hands. The bone bouquet clattered to the ground. It didn't shatter, it planted. And from each small hollow, a flower began to bloom, one by one. Each a different color, each a different name. A girl stepped forward from the crowd, young, barefoot. She picked one of the flowers, placed it behind her ear, and smiled. Claire turned to Noah. He smiled too, not in triumph, in relief. The curse was not broken in fire, it was broken in refusal. This was the wedding the land had feared, not because it wasn't sacred, but because it was finally free. That night, they held no reception, no dancing, no speeches, just a table outside the cottage, a loaf of bread, a pot of tea, and a new silence, not heavy, not hollow, a silence that rested. And from the distance, the sound of children laughing, not chanting, laughing. The wedding was never recorded, but it was remembered, as the day the tree let go, as the day the bride said no, as the day the village did not die, even without the veil.
The stump is still there, not rotting, not cursed, just quiet. Each morning, Claire walks to the clearing barefoot, fingers grazing the tall grass as she moves through the low mist. The sky above is soft now, not red, not bruised, just sky. The tree is gone, but its roots remain. They don't whisper anymore. They don't hunger. They just rest. The village never held another wedding beneath the trees. There were no more rites, no more veils, no more chants whispered into the bark of a living curse. Instead, the chapel was opened again, not for ceremony, for stories. Children come now, with sticks and drawings and questions. They sit in a circle, and Claire tells them about Elira, about the bride who said no, about the voice that broke the chain. She never calls her a ghost, only a girl who deserved more than to be forgotten. Noah works in the garden now. His hands have grown calloused. He hums when he moves. Sometimes he stops mid-task and stares into the trees, eyes clowning just slightly, as if remembering something that doesn't belong to him anymore. But it always passes. The veil inside him is gone. She burned it. And what rose in its place was not a scream, but a song. One evening, as dusk wrapped the village in gold and blue, Claire found something beneath the sprout in the clearing. A bone, small, smooth, not from violence, from return. She buried it gently, said nothing, because she knew who it belonged to, and knew he was no longer lost.
The villagers changed slowly. Some still looked at Claire with suspicion, the way you might look at someone who carried lightning in her hands once. But most had softened. The old rituals were not replaced. They were allowed to die, like a fire left to burn itself out until the ashes became soil again. And in that soil, something new took root. In the fall, the first real harvest bloomed. Late, yes, but lush. Not perfect, but honest. The villagers wept as they pulled potatoes from the dirt, as they held apples in their hands that hadn't grown under a curse. They tasted different, sweeter, not because the tree had blessed them, but because they had grown without a body beneath. Claire wrote a letter. She left it in the hollow where the tree once stood, folded it in lace, tied it with black ribbon. Inside, only one line: "You are not forgotten." That winter, the snow came early, gentle, thick, soundless. Claire walked the forest path in the dusk, bundled in a wool coat, holding a small lantern. She reached the clearing and found the sapling, now waist-high, bending beneath the weight of snow, but not breaking. She cleared the branches with gloved hands, kissed the trunk once, and whispered, "Grow in peace. No more names buried in your roots. No more mouths sewn shut. No more brides." The wind blew softly, but carried no words, only silence. The good kind. The kind that meant everything had finally been said. Claire and Noah never held another wedding. They didn't need to. Their bond wasn't sealed by vow or veil or altar. It was made in the act of survival, in grief shared, in blood washed clean, in choosing to speak when silence was expected. Years passed. Children grew. The forest greened again. The fields bloomed in seasons they never used to. But the stump was never moved. It became a place of remembering. A place no one prayed to, but all honored. They called it the last altar, not for what was sacrificed there, but for what was finally refused. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind is just right, you can still hear the veils rustling. Not in warning, not in grief, in release. Claire grows old, but not haunted. She forgets some things, names, faces, but never Elira, and never the feeling of being watched by something that only wanted her voice. On her final day, she walks to the stump, alone, white hair braided, lips calm. She kneels once more, not as a bride, not as an offering, but as a witness. She touches the tree one last time and says, softly, "Let go." And this time, it does.